Hi, we have another lesson, Chapter 12, Lesson 2, on frequency tables, line plots, and histograms, and we are continuing our work into the exciting world of data collection. Now, last time I told you that data collection is actually really important. It's becoming more increasingly important as pretty much every day goes by, because the chances are the job that you have in your future, the big job that kind of lets you live life, will likely revolve around data collection. And everything about what you are and who you are, at least in the minds of companies that want your attention, the ads that show up on Instagram, and the billboards that are lining the streets that you drive, a lot of them have to do with data collection. They don't put those things there just randomly. They kind of know who's in that area and how it appeal to them, and what's going to make the most sense. And the chances are that your job is going to revolve around this. So data collection is really important. So looking more into these things does bear some importance in your life. We're going to be looking at two easy ways, I guess 3 easy ways of data collection, ways to represent data, boring numbers, as something that might be a little bit more useful. We're going to be able to display data in frequency tables and line plots, and also to be able to make histograms out of it. So let's go ahead and look at it. You can display data in what's called a frequency table, which lists data, each data item with the number of times it occurs. Frequency means how often or how many times it occurs. How often does it happen? How frequently do you guys check your phone every day? Well, if you're checking your phone even when you're bored and you don't really have any reason to check your phone, it's probably pretty frequent, right? A lot of people, myself included, we just have that issue where we just are frequently looking at our phone, and we don't have time to get into how that impacts your life, but that is something that happens very frequently. Or sometimes something seldomly occur. How often do you read this math textbook just for fun? Probably not that frequently. So frequency has to do with how often it occurs. And we can take that data and we can go ahead and put that into a table, or to make what's called a line plot. So somebody with too much time on their hands, they rolled a numbered cube or a dice 20 times, and they got these values: 5, 2, 5, 4, 1, 6, 5, 2, 5, 1. And then the other ones. All right, they rolled the number and they wrote down how many times each number they got. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this data and we're going to put this in the table. All right, the number that they rolled is in one column. All right, they did a little tally to mark how often it happened. Why would they do that? Because it might be easier when making a table just a tally mark. And in the frequencies, we're gonna take these tally marks and we're going to make them to actual numbers. So this has 3 tick marks, tally marks, so we have 3 times. So how many times was 1 rolled? 3 times. How many times did they roll a 2? Twice. How many times did they roll a 3? 4 times. How many times did they roll a 4? And so on. Now from here, what we can do is we can take a look at this and we can see, okay, well, which number did they roll the least? Well, I can look through my numbers and say, well, you know what? 2 and 6 were both rolled twice. That's another way to do it. Another way that we can do this is we can make what's called a line plot. A line plot takes the number that they rolled, and they just put little X's over how many times each one was rolled. Now, why would they go through all the effort of doing this? Why can't they just look at these numbers and just say, okay, well, the one that they rolled the most was, let me count them. Well, for that reason, if I just gave you a bunch of numbers and I said, here, analyze the data, and you're just looking at every number, it would be really confusing to try to figure out which ones use most, which ones use least, and that's probably not the best way to do it. A table might be better because it organizes all the data, but a picture might be the best way to do that, because really, as human beings in this year, 2020, I don't know if this is going to be watched later than that, but this video was recorded in 2020. Probably the greatest year in the history of the world. Probably not. a picture is actually worth a lot. It's a lot easier to like take this data and to look at it and to analyze it, because I could try to double check these numbers, or I can look at, well, which column has the most amount of x's. If I ask which number was rolled the most, you would say 5. Why? Because it's the highest stack. All right, so kind of something to keep in mind, that pictures are worth a lot more. And for that reason, a lot of things that we see and use on a daily basis, they are geared towards giving you a visual representation of data. You might not think of these things as data, but they are. Take, for instance, your cell phone. Right now, if you have an Apple or a Google phone, you might have an app that kind of tracks how often you use certain apps. All right, this is just a stock picture that I pulled off of Google. But basically what they're doing is they're giving you a pictorial representation, a visual representation of how often you use certain apps, whether it's Facebook, and then they give you more data at the bottom and tell you how many minutes each one's used. But really, this might be a way more valuable tool for you to use to try to interpret, whatever you're trying to figure out, than just numbers. If they just gave you a bunch of numbers, it might not, especially if they're not organized, it might not do that much for you. It might not mean much to you. But if you're looking at pictures and colors and you're visually representing the data, that might be an easier way for your brain to see what's really happening, to see which apps you're using the most, or which might shame you into use Netflix less, right? That's kind of what's happening right now. We need to monitor these things, and just because we live nowadays, it is a healthy reminder that everything around us can be counted, and it should be quantified. We should actually take a really deep look into what we're doing with our lives and where we're spending our most time. So let's go ahead and look at California Standards Check number 1, and then we're going to go ahead and do a frequency table to display the data. Standards check number 1 asks us to display the data below in a frequency table. So they give us a bunch of numbers. So I have a bunch of numbers. And I'm going to go ahead and record how frequently, how many times we use each number. So looking at my data, looking at the digits, it looks like the smallest number is 10. And there's at least 1, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 out of all these numbers. And all we're going to do is count how many times we see each number. So every time I'm going to count the number of tens, and every time I use the number 10, I'm going to cross it out, and then I'm going to put how many times it occurred. So there's how many tens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are 5 tens. How many 11s are there? There are 1, 2, 3 11s. Use a different color if you want to go ahead and just kind of keep this in mind. How many 12s are there? 1, 2 12s. I only see 2 12s. How many 13s are there? 1, 2. There are 2 13s. How many 14s are there? There's 1 14. And how many 15s are there? 1, 2. And that's it. That is a frequency table, and this is what you would expect to see on your homework. All we're doing is organizing the data and figuring out how many times we use it. Now, if I ask you which number is used the most or the least or the middleist, maybe this is one way. I might be able to figure that out. Another thing we can do is you can make what's called a line plot. Now, remember, this question did not ask us to make a line plot, but this is how you would do it. You just list your numbers on the bottom: 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and you just put little X's for how many times it's used. According to this, there is 10 occurs 5 times, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can just go down the list, and this might give you a more visual representation of how often each number was used or how little each number was used. All right, so looking at this, which number was used the most? It looks like 10 was used the most. And which number was used the least? It looks like 14 was used the least. Now remember, the homework, this question did not ask us to make a line plot, but this might be really good information to have. So this is a frequency table. Frequency table. Cool. All right, the last thing we should talk about in this lesson are the use of histograms. A histogram shows the frequencies of data items as a graph. And again, I guess the goal for this lesson is to take numbers and make them more appealing, more easy to understand, and putting them into a picture might be better. So the data are often grouped into intervals. Interval is a fancy word that just means groups or ranges, or like I guess probably groups is probably the best way to put it. The intervals are equal size, that's very important, and they do not overlap. So let's go ahead and look at this example right here. The results of testing 12 batteries of the same type are shown at the right, and the number of hours of battery life. So this battery was tested and it got 9 hours of battery life. 12, 14, 10, 15, blah, blah, blah. All right. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do, I need to figure out what my interval is going to be. And the way that I do that is I go ahead and just figure out what's my biggest number and what's my smallest number. The biggest number looks like it is going to be about 22, and the smallest number is about 9. That means our hours have to be somewhere between there. Now, when they decide on interval size, they say the data starts at 9 hours and goes to about 23. I guess 23 is the biggest number, so about 24. So what they decided to do is to make every interval 4 hours. They said from batteries that lasted 9 to 12 hours, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's 4 hours. And then they said, the next 4-hour interval would be 13 through 16 hours. And the next 4-hour interval will be 17 through 20, and the next one will be 21 through 24. So they decided these groups. Now what you could do is you can make these groups whatever size that you want, but we want to use numbers that are going to definitely show the difference. We don't want to use too big numbers. If you say, well, my group's going to be 1 through 24 hours, whoop, they're all in the same group, I'm done. Probably not the best way to do this. You want to try to pick hour intervals of 3 or 4. Numbers that are easy to work with. Notice none of the numbers overlap. Then they just made a tally. They counted how many batteries fell into that 9 to 12 hour range, and there were 6 of them, and then how many fell into the next range, and so on. And then they went ahead and made a graph. Now this graph, or this is called a histogram, and it includes a couple of important things. All right, one, we have the hours. The hours are at the bottom right here. This is the x-axis. And then we have the frequency, or how many times it occurs. Now, which range had the most batteries in that range? Well, this one does. How can I tell? Because visually, this is going to be the highest one, means it has the biggest group. All right. The least amount of batteries were in the 17 through 20 hour range, right? Because it's the smallest group. All right. And I mean, that's it. One thing you got to make sure is you make sure that you include a title and label your axes, because you want to know what this information is. If I just gave you all of this without the titles of the axes, then it wouldn't mean anything. And these numbers, they need to mean something, right? If I just gave you a graph and say, hey, what do you think? I'm like, well, about what? I don't care. I don't care, man. What did you give me, man? Well, you should care. All right, because this is data, this is representative of a bigger picture that we want to kind of get used to. All right, cool? Cool. All right, so that's it. That concludes our lesson for section 2 of chapter 12. On your homework, you might have a couple of questions, not a whole lot of questions about this stuff. Just be ready to interpret the data from the graphs. I'm going to be making the graphs and giving them to you as multiple choice options. Just be ready to interpret them and to make sure that they fit into the right, they make the most sense. Like in this example, they did it in intervals of 4 hours. On the standard check, they can easily change it to 3 hours. So we're going to try to keep those smaller numbers in mind.